Thanks for joining us today, Eddie. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Can you tell us a little bit about the Global Order of Satan and whether or not they believe in Satan?
Right. Okay. So the Global Order of Satan, or GOS, as I think it's probably easier to refer to, is a um, UK-based but more internationally focused umbrella organization of autonomous and individual satanic organizations. So we are explicitly we're non-theistic, so we don't believe in Satan or a literal devil. It's using the term less of a legitimate religious sense and more like a wider literary or the wider sort of literary sense of the term. So using the image and the idea of Satan along the lines of the Miltonian idea of um, Lucifer and Satan as someone thrown out of heaven and then having to rebuild themselves in their own view of cut that trying to rebuild themselves and their own way of existing. The idea less of better to rule in hell than serve in heaven, that sort of line.
So, no literal Satan. You don't believe that there is a literal Satan, but you see Satan as some sort of figure to emulate, at least the story of Satan, as
Yes.
something that
Yeah.
personally empowering.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Especially the idea of like we follow the idea of very closely like Milton's Lucifer becoming Satan, the idea of like a powerful, self-assured, really confident character that then is asked to be in service towards humans who are in their eyes are not exactly the biggest or the best sort of characters or creatures, and how Lucifer themselves would desire more of a state of free will to do what they want and have control over their own selves.
Now, are there Satanists who do believe in Satan, or is that just a complete myth?
That is a that well, I mean that's a terminological term, I suppose. It depends on how you're defining Satanism. There's a lot of people Satanism, the term itself. If we date back to Anton LaVey, for whom a lot of people would say the modern inverted commas satanic movement will begin in the '60s, would just distinguish between Satanism being the non-theistic, specifically sort of movement around the idea where there is no God or devil or magic or supernatural. It is just existing within the material world and then using these ideas and concepts and invoking them to have that sort of like power over yourself. And then what he would refer to as devil worship, which is believing in your literal devil and Satan and God, imagine that sort of thing, and trying to invoke power by selling yourself to that idea. So if you follow that sort of idea, then no, there are no Satanists who believe in a literal Satan or the devil. However, the terms exist as people use them. So there are people who would consider themselves theistic Satanists, which is a term, although we don't believe that they're we don't personally believe that their idea of what it is aligns with any sort of Satanism we would recognize or appreciate.
So, can you speak a bit more about Anton LaVey versus the Global Order of Satanists? Because it sounds like there's two different ideas going on there. What's the difference exactly?
Again, like a bigger sort of uh, question. It's. I think we always talk of a very common joke is like if you put like 6 different Satanisms in a room, you'll have 10 different forms of Satanism. Um, the LaVey being the person who would typically, when people talk about modern Satanism, we talk a lot of LaVey, and LaVey is a character of quite a bit of how do you say trying to remember the word I'm looking for now. LaVey is quite divisive as a character. They are the sort of person who has not exactly got a great history behind them, either pre or post sort of the concept of Satanism. Their idea of Satanism is very different to what we recognize and what we would appreciate today as well. It's less of it's a lot more focusing on like the idea of the self being super important and it must be above all others. So the idea of that, if yourself is, I guess the better way of thinking about it is this: we are Satanism the way we practice and preach it. We refer to as like a compassionate Satanism, as opposed to like their more rational or modern Satanism. So we would see the idea of Satanism, which can be distilled into the self is the most important part, and everyone's self is inviolable and must be respected, and therefore we should fight to have everyone's self protected and given the space for them to be who they are. And look, at divine Satanism, like the self is the most important, and therefore you must fight to have yourself above all others. This sort of way. So it's more of like a, although I don't say this to disparage, it's more of a selfish Satanism. It's the idea of like you must be building a space to have yourself, and if anyone were to go against you, you must destroy them. As opposed to an idea of like building a collective space where everyone can have their own selves be the most themselves, I guess.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm aware of having thrown a lot of word salad there. A lot of LaVey's teaching, a lot of like I guess the dark history of modern Satanism is that a lot of what it was codified in the Satanic Bible is based on and written whole cloth out of might is right, which is quite a well-known historical far-right text, which a lot of us would reject and would have very little to do with today. But when LaVey was writing and teaching and doing what he was doing, it was quite the popular thing to have around, and it was quite the popular thing to try and like jump off of, although clearly not enough to reference explicitly.
Well, that's fair. But I want to kind of come back to this idea that you said if you get 10 different Satanists in a room, you're going to have 10 different Satanisms. Now, that must be pretty difficult for you as a chaplain. How do you manage that?
It's about finding what we have in common and focusing on that as opposed to trying to focus on what divides us, although we may all like practice our Satanism differently and believe that we have like ultimately different goals, there's a lot more that defines us and a lot more that holds us together. Like the concept of that being a Satanist to begin with holds us together. The concept of it being a like progressive non-theistic religion where we believe everyone's self has a right to be who they are and must be protected and fought for at all costs is what holds us together. Those sort of things. It is complicated, and it does lead to a lot of conflict and fight. There's like, if anyone's vaguely aware of the current state of modern Satanism, they're aware that a lot of it is currently dealing with internal fighting and people falling out and people leaving various established organizations. And to be fair, a lot of them are right to do so, and that is kind of the deal with it. I think it was a few years back. Some people who are a part of a collective called Queer Satanic, who are really, really great people, and they're doing a lot of really good work, who are currently fighting an ongoing court case fought by an organization they used to be a part of called the Satanic Temple, would describe it as if you're having issues with an organization you're sitting in, you should start out on your own and roll your own dice and do your own Satanism and make it your own thing. And that's kind of the beauty of the idea of that sort of faith, is that although you can work within a larger organization, if you feel like it works better for you to do it your own way, then go do it your own way. And it's about establishing a space for people to be able to do that in a more broad way that you could make, I guess.
Would you be willing to tell us a little bit about your own personal journey to Satanism? Did you grow up in a religious home or a Satanist home? What's your own story?
I did not grow up in a Satanist town. That'd be very funny. No, I'm what I jokingly refer to as recovering Catholic. So grew up quite Catholic with Catholic family and Catholic household, and did the Catholic school and all that journey. Communion, confirmation, and then fell out of it through just having various theological questions that I couldn't get answered through my priest or my church or my school and all that sort of thing. Although they were quite helpful and quite open to having these sort of conversations, it was not the easiest way of doing it. I grew up quite left wing. My family have always been quite left wing, and so I would be coming at things with like a very left wing progressive sort of perspective, and then I'd be reading various stories in the Bible and then being expected to accept things without questioning it and to like offer servitude without questioning it because God is all powerful and all important. And that, to me, I always had an issue with, and I always like threw a question up to myself and go like, how does that work in with how I perceive the world around me and how I think we should exist within it? Which was less than ideal for that. So that was it was quite difficult to have when you're a young teenager in a Catholic school where everyone around you, although nominally would be on your side, just wouldn't get the concepts that you deal with, which makes me sound like I'm more profound than I actually am. Then I came across, when I was quite young, the Satanic Bible by LaVey, and read it and liked some of it, but also found a lot of it quite questionable and problematic. I grew up and I studied, the rise of Thatcherism, Reaganism in the States, and how the idea of that sort of selfish politics would break down the idea of there being any sort of like societal link and culture between it, everyone out for their own and that sort of stuff. And so reading that again in the Satanic Bible, go like, okay, cool. How would I make that work for myself if I was looking at it? Would try and like jerry rig an idea, going like, the way to make yourself better, the way to have like your own like best self is by building a better society where everyone is lifted up, which doesn't really work with what's written in the Satanic Bible or other like wider LaVey writing. But for the time, was someone who was quite deeply embedded within Satanism as a structure. Someone who's developed, it was built quite within Catholicism as a structure. I still wanted to have that sort of community, even if it was much more disparate, which Satanism offered, and still had some of the like iconography and the other things that I'm familiar with as someone who was Catholic, images of demons and devils, and being able to involve myself in larger chants and that sort of, if not worship space, then that sort of larger space to begin with.
So, kind of on that topic, though, would you then consider Satanism a form of a religion? I know this gets into some odd, kind of vague territory, but do they consider themselves a religion?
Yes. I would consider myself religious. I consider myself non-theistic, so I don't believe in any sort of supernatural or greater powers, but I believe in the structures that we have. I believe in quiet worship. I believe in the rituals we do and how we interact with one another and the spaces and the things we believe in to be a religion. It's a modern religion. Or a neo-religious movement, as a lot of people like to refer to them as.
And I'm sure that probably shocks a lot of our listeners to hear a non-theistic religion, because I'm sure most of them probably equate religion with some sort of belief in God. What is it about Satanism then that you think makes it religious?
Oh, that's a great question. It's the sort of question that I get asked a lot and comes up again. It's the common.
Sorry.
It's completely fine. Having difficult question to answer makes that's theology, baby. It's having like a common belief structure, even if the plots are disparate. You don't need to have like a codified written set of rules to be a religion. These exist. They are like, broadly speaking, agreed upon principles, but even if the things they are different and how you perform them are different, it's still an ethical structure. It's having the guidelines we live by. We have our pillars, as the Blood Order saying, we stand by, and those are, if nothing else, like our main foundational religious text. And it's guidelines to live by. It's like an admittedly negative, but it's a philosophical and theological belief in something. It's like, although we don't believe in there existing any sort of god or supernatural element or devil or magic, then but that's still a firm the word has escaped me. But that's a firm like belief in how the world around us is structured. We have our own rituals, we have our own things we do, we have our own way of doing things along our lines of a religious practice, So it's a faith, it's a religion. Although the faith may or may not believe in anything above us, we believe in ourselves to be higher than we let ourselves be.
Now, you've spoken a little bit about this. You said you had like these common guidelines that unify you. And you've outlined that a little bit, but is there like an equivalent of like a 10 commandments for Satanism? Like these are the things that we hold to, everyone has to sort of get on board with.
Yes, yeah. We have our what we refer to as the 6 pillars. So there's 6 like guiding principles of what we do, and whenever you do anything, be it satanic or just be it your life, you should be thinking about them through these sort of things. They're quite vague, but they're quite open. Not every organisation have the same ones. A lot of them are quite different. So we have our 6 pillars. TST has their 6 tenets. I know Church of Satan, for what it is, has their own laws of the earth and laws of Satanism as well. But ours are to list them through. So that's always a fun. I love lists. Self-fulfillment and personal understanding allow us to support ourselves and therefore others. Respect the inviolable body, autonomous will, and sovereign right of every individual to guide their own life and being, remembering that enjoyment of these rights is predicated on respect for the same in others. Science, evidence, reason, and critical thinking should guide our beliefs about our universe. Truly critical thinking can only be achieved by challenging your own perceptions and opinions, providing a more balanced outlook to help us make better informed decisions. Act with empathy, compassion, and wisdom towards yourself and others. Justice always takes precedence over laws, institutions, and religious texts, as long as the pursuit of it does not countermand the pillars. All people make mistakes. Allow them to correct those mistakes as we seek acceptance in others over our own.
All right. Now that it does have a lot of overlaps with a lot of traditional religions. Like there's a lot of empathy and forgiveness and that sort of stuff then.
Yes, yeah, I'd say so. I think that although we imagine ourselves as post-religious or like a new religious movement, I don't think we would necessarily discount the teachings of how religious organizations and structures have existed in the past. I think there's a lot to learn from them that are useful and to keep in hand.
Now, switching a little bit then, these are the 6 pillars. Is that true for just the global order of Satan, or is this true across many different other orders? And in fact, what are these orders? Can you help enlighten our audience on what are the different kinds of Satanism that are out there right now?
That's a great sort of open-ended question. I think like the biggest ones that people would think about when you talk about Satanism, you would think of the Church of Satan, which was LaVey's church. He started in the 60s, which was for a while the biggest and the main sort of bastion of satanic thought, which is still going and has been going for a very long time. It's not one that we philosophically or theologically align ourselves with on the way they do things. There's also TST, the Satanic Temple, which is the more popular, more recently sort of well-known organization that started in, say, 2014. Although I'm not 100% on that, I'm not a scholar for TST, and I will not shill for them. But they are the ones that people seem to be more familiar with these days. They are the ones who kind of helped codify the idea of a modern progressive Satanism, even if they didn't necessarily act upon it at all times. I guess like there's quite a few. Over here in the United Kingdom, there's an organisation that was for a while the Satanic Temple's UK branch. I think their second attempt at starting a UK branch, which left after a schism in this Satanic Temple and they form themselves as the Sanctum of Satan. They seem to be doing quite well as a small grassroots satanic organisation. And we wish them the best, which is always good to see like more smaller groups starting up. And there's a lot of other like independent organizations over in the States as well. That seems to be the most popular place for them to start.
Now, when it comes to, you mentioned that you do have rituals, you do have weekly services. If I were to walk in, what sort of ritual or ceremony ought I expect? What would that look like for me?
I mean, it depends what you're walking into, because a lot of the time, like all of our practices
That's
are
fair.
closed. So most of our practices are closed practices. So in terms of things like our initiations, which is less of a formal, you're in the order, more of like it's a sort of a welcoming sort of space to bring you on board, to make you feel like you're amongst friends. We do those. That's a lot of allowing people to like recant their or renounce their histories that they don't necessarily believe in anymore, and sign themselves up to like the new sort of space they want to be in. There's always popular ones which are more public, things that we do which are like our unbaptisms, which is allowing members of the public to come forth and through us like unbaptize themselves from their traditional religious spaces. Normally people who are born Catholic get baptized against their will when they were quite young without a choice to do so. We also occasionally, for formal business, do invocations and then ritual preparation of the space, which is less of a actual sort of magical ritual, more of like a way of getting everyone in the mind frame to engage in whatever business or whatever we're doing for that sort of day.
Is there a day of the week that you meet?
Not always. It depends as and when people are around. There's no specific sort of days we meet. It's less focusing on sort of like the rigid it's less focused on the rigid adherence to the weekly sort of day set structure, and more on like a free flowing way of letting people engage how they want to, engage how they need to. Having like strict days you must follow and strict ways of doing it can, for a lot of people, be antithetical to the point of Satanism, which is meant to be open, it's meant to be freeing, it's meant to be about the self, and like by following specific guide rules, you're limiting yourself to do so.
Now, you did mention something about like icons and stuff that resonated with your Catholic past. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yes, Catholic art is kick-ass and looks really cool. I mean, it's fun. It's sorry, pleasure. It's a lot to go up on as a young person when you're walking into a room and you're seeing a lot of people who are clearly bleeding and being tortured. But the art around it is really cool. It looks really cool, and it leaves an impression on you. It's hard to say otherwise. Like how do you look at if you walk into a Catholic space and and there's a saint who's clearly being hung up and they're bleeding slowly over the course of a day, with people yelling underneath them, throwing weapons at them. That's an impressive image, and it's there. And it's, from one aspect, it's quite like the show of self-sacrifice from one person who clearly has like a devotion to what they believe in and stands for. And on the other, it's you could say it's a callous waste of your own life in face of something that necessarily doesn't have your best interest in heart. Which you may or may not say about the institution of the Catholic Church. And also, like, who doesn't love angels? Who doesn't love the image of demons? Like the constant sort of like heavenly warfare. It's impressive imagery. It's really hard to like get that out of your head once you've seen it and once you've grown up and been immersed in it.
So in the place, as a chaplain, do you replicate this in any places where you tend to meet?
Kind of, I guess. You try and bring the psychodrome, you try and bring the pomp and the ceremony around it. You have your big, like, ornate chalices, you have your big robes, you have your sort of flowery ceremony, like a lot of the larger than life sort of thing that you bring when you are doing some sort of like big faith ceremony. You try and make that work.
And so you tend to lead these, I'm guessing, these big sort of ritual ceremonies?
I do. Sometimes other members do. It very much is depending on like what people want to do and people how they want to do it. Like allowing people to like hold a ceremony, or like how allowing people to run like a ritual themselves, if that's how they find themselves being affirmed, and that's what they want. That's also quite empowering. That's quite necessary for a lot of people.
So for these rituals, are they in order? It sounds like there's a lot of creativity and freedom in this, but are there any sort of guides? Like this is the sort of ceremony we're going to do today. Essentially, like a book of common prayer or something like that.
Kind of. There's a few things that we do that we have around that we like, have between each other, the rituals we've done in the past and things that worked and beats to hit, I suppose. And a lot of people do just follow that sort of like beat to hit program, but it's allowing the people the space to be able to do what they need to do inside it as well, making it more open. And because like we are an international organization with orders in like across Europe and now in the States and places in South America, we have a lot of people who do things a little bit differently. So we've got a lot of resources to pull from across the world, and so finding those sort of like cultural quirks and differences in how people do stuff is really fascinating and really quite helpful to like make our own way of doing things a little bit different as well.
Is there a favorite part of a normal meeting or ceremony for you?
Personally, it's being around my peers. It's seeing like my family, as it were. It's being around them and being able to be around them in a way that I wouldn't necessarily have if I wasn't there for it. It's the same sort of experience people have when you're in church. It's having like a religious experience when you're at church, when you're among people who clearly believe in the same sort of thing, and they're there and they're following the steps, and they will have that sort of, you'd hope, love in their heart. Is a really quite affirming experience, and it's something they don't necessarily have when you leave that sort of religious space. So being able to do that with people who believe in the similar sort of things that I do, and people believe in the idea of the mission and believe in doing ritual and believe in doing the space that we have, it's quite affirming, it's quite welcoming. So being around my peers and my family is the best part of having a ritual space, I would say.
Yeah, sure. And this might be a bit personal, but people from your life before, friends and family from before, how have they interacted with you since your joining of the Global Order of Satan?
Oh, I mean, it makes sense to a lot of people. I know, I feel like people they kind of get it. It's what it is. I'm not completely out and about it, so a lot of people I know aren't necessarily aware of that fact. But I've never hidden it, and a lot of people go like, "Oh, that makes sense. Okay, cool." And then if people have
That's a
questions,
lot better than I thought it was going to,
well, yeah,
from what you were going to say.
I'm quite lucky to have people around me. I'm quite lucky to be in a space where I'm able to have people who are confident and trust me enough that if I'm doing something, it's for the right reasons and not because I'm trying to establish power over the world or what have you. And then I'm also quite open about it. People ask me questions about it, I'm going like, oh, this is the reasons why, and here we go. I'm quite lucky to have that sort of like grip around me in that sort of respect, and I always have been.
Well, I'm sure despite that, you still probably get a lot of myths or misconceptions about what you believe or what you practice and stuff like that. What are some of those?
Oh, that it will make me rich and famous. That would be nice if that could happen at some point. Cool. There's also like the sort of like, oh, you worship a literal Satan. Like, no, I don't. That would make me, I don't know, an evangelical Christian. It's that sort of space. It's the idea that you try and sacrifice things. We don't sacrifice things. That takes the control and the consent and the will of something away if you sacrifice it. So there's no point us doing that if that's how we believe in running our sort of structures. It's, do you believe in dark magic, and do your rituals make things happen? Like, rituals make things happen in the sense that if you do it, they come true? Question mark. Like, if you cross the road, your ritual is you look left and right, and the result of that is you don't get hit by a car. The ritual is what you put into it, and that's what you get out of it. So it's
So there's no dead cats.
There's no dead cats. That would be appalling. A lot of our members are vegan and vegetarian. And they would have a riot. No dead cats. No dead birds.
So what about like pentagrams or Baphomets?
Oh yeah,
are those in any part of?
Yeah, the camera's not very good, but I'm wearing a pentagram now. The pentagram's always there. It adds to it. It's the sort of like iconography you can bind yourself to. It's the psychodrama of it, that sort of thing. Baphomet again is another great image that people seem to align themselves with. It's something that stood the test of time, especially Solve Coagula, Dissolve and Recreate. It's about breaking down what has made you who you are and then rebuilding yourself as somewhere where you want to be. That's a great image, the way I've always seen it. The idea of, like, the image of Lucifer, the Lightbringer, going into war in heaven, admittedly before he gets cast out, but that's, again, another great image. It's having those sort of things around you. It's being able to, like, find yourself to iconography that you can believe in. The pentagram's one of those things, especially a small symbol of, like, what you hold to yourself and be able to carry it with you is quite nice.
And just out of curiosity, do you happen to know the origin of how pentagrams and Baphomets became associated with the organization, with Satanism?
Satanism generally, I'm pretty sure pentagrams became, I believe prior to the 1960s, pentagrams didn't really have sort of any association with Satanism generally, and it became codified with it when Anton LaVey decided to use it as the inverted image as part of his symbol for what Satanism was. When I refer to an inverted pentagram, I mean with the point facing down. The regular sort of original pentagram is with the 2 points at the bottom and the star facing upwards. Like, prior to that, pentagrams were a symbol used in a lot of cultures, a lot of things. Even a lot of Christian sects would use pentagrams. Typically, like, but now you really only see it amongst people who are Satanists or people who are pagan or neo-Wiccan, that sort of thing.
And what about a Baphomet? First off, I guess I should probably ask you to define what a Baphomet is, because I'm sure some of our audience has no idea what that term is, but they've probably seen it.
Yeah, let me get a proper image before I say something incredibly wrong, even if I'm probably speaking aware of what it is. So Baphomet it's the image of I believe what people refer to as the hermaphroditic goat with wings. So it's the body of both a half male, half female person with a head of a goat and often with wings. Like, historically, it's historically, the first image of it is described by Eliphas Levi, who was about in the 1800s, 9th century, and it was to try and put an image to the concept of a deity that the Knights Templar were accused of worshipping back when that went down. It's association from there on. It's the idea of, like, a satanic sort of thing, even back in the day. So that sort of initial link with it. And my history on the Crusades and Baphomet is not completely 100% up to scratch, but its association with modern Satanism is something that's dated back from before the 60s. So it's sort of an image that kind of followed itself, because again, it's a really quite powerful and impressive image to exist, and it looks really interesting, and it's something that definitely would not be necessarily considered a traditional sort of Christian symbol, especially when you had Knights Templars post-Crusade who were had the Inquisition against them and thrown out and executed and tortured horribly because they believed themselves to have fallen away from Christ and started worshipping something else. I'm aware that
some sort of devil figure, right? That was the accusation,
yeah.
Right?
Yes, yeah. 100%.
Yeah. And it's most known in the U.S. because of these separation of church and state issues, where you'll see, like, the Ten Commandments on some public or government ground.
Mm-hmm.
And so I believe it's the Satanic Temple in the U.S. is trying to put Baphomets next to that. And there was one that I think in Oklahoma that was recently that was placed,
mm-hmm.
But then was vandalized a little bit later.
Yeah, which is how.
And so that's how it's sort of entered public consciousness.
Yes, yeah, I mean, 100%.
So
yeah. Go ahead. That sort of image. That is that the Baphomet that they use is not a traditional Baphomet. It's one that is purely masculine in body, which they did. I believe the explanation for that is so it would get easy approval for public grounds if it wasn't showing obvious female breasts, and having, like, a masculine form. It's easier to get that across. which some people call them cowards for, but to be fair, it's probably a sensible thing to try and do if you're trying to do something as transgressive as get a devil figure on a public ground in front of a state building. So I don't necessarily disagree with how they did that. And again, like, it's a masterstroke, and the way they did it is genius. And I think that it's a great idea. It's a really, really good way of getting like a lot of publicists on your idea. And I think, and that does make sense. It's where people will start picking that up from the public consciousness. But traditionally, it's been like a satanic symbol before that.
So. And in the U.S., Satanism's really taken on that sort of political angle to it as well. As the Global Order of Satan in the U.K., does it have a sort of similar political angle?
We do. We're less overt about it. So a lot of what we do and believe, we try and work with people in groups. We do what people sometimes refer to as shadow work in magic communities, which is working against the idea of something by purporting to be with it. We don't necessarily have like the huge funding or financial backing that TST mysteriously has, so they can use to be quite litigious for groups. Which, and like a lot of their public action, a lot of their causes are quite litigious by going into places and establishing that sort of thing, and they're trying to sue people or trying to fund cases on their behalf, provided it's through a satanic lens. So we don't necessarily have that sort of backing or that security to be able to do something as overt as that, but we do have like our way of doing things. We do have our own political beliefs that are informed by our satanic practice. We are quite open about, if we see things, especially in the UK, if we see things that are against satanic practice, that we stand against those. Because again, like Pillar 5 justice being taking precedence over laws, institutions, and religious texts, it's believing in something above what people may commonly refer to as the law, and like something that is better than or more important than, and things must change to make that better. Like recently we had recently we had a document released by Dr. Hilary Cass, which was referred to openly as the Cass Report, which was a study on transgender care for young people in the United Kingdom. Transgender care in the United Kingdom for young people is woefully underfunded and quite dangerous, and without active improvement will cost lives. The Cass Report was a cautiously optimistic thing for a lot of people who were existing in that circles, and the release of which was full of what is, in my personal opinion, a document full of pseudoscience, a lot of deliberate misinformation, a lot of naked transphobia, a lot of the texts that they said they couldn't find evidence for like these things were ones they deliberately discarded before going to print. And so when that was released, we took a very deliberate public principle stand on that this is a deliberate infringement and a way of getting away from people being able to express their own personal existence and rights. And if the recommendations are followed, then it will possibly result in the lives of young people who are gender non-conforming or trans questioning, which has then resulted in, prior to the election, prior to like Parliament being dissolved over here very recently, the current Health Secretary using emergency powers to completely block puberty blockers for young people who are doing it specifically if they're trans, which will, in my opinion, result in lost lives. And so that is something that we are consciously aware of, and something that we will continuously fight against as and when it comes out.
So you also mentioned, my mind is circling back to when you mentioned that some Satanist organizations are currently in a bit of splitting or turmoil or conflict. And I wanted to return to that because obviously I'm not an insider on that. Can you enlighten our audience on what's the current state of Satanism?
The current state of Satanism, I guess, in a popular sense, is that TST in the United States is shedding itself of its members, both voluntarily and involuntarily, through the actions of its leadership. and executive ministry. I don't know how much I'm comfortable going into without having people check back on me, but I would highly recommend looking at the work that Queer Satanic is doing, documenting the episodes that go on and how people leave and what happens. My personal thoughts and hopes are with the people who this is directly affecting, people who have given money to become official ministers, who have been kicked out through just asking questions and just being a little bit people who don't necessarily think that the way the organization currently is being run is the best and are asking questions surrounding that and being reviewed as official ministers of TST. My thoughts are with them. My thoughts are with the individual chapters who believe in the mission statement of TST and don't necessarily have the believe in the mission statement of TST and don't necessarily think they continue being a Satanism, being in that organization while it does what it does, and wanting to do better. My thoughts are definitely not with the people who are causing the problem, which is directly the executive ministry and their leadership. And as that continues, and as this sort of fallout from this goes, we're going to see more and more members who were once regarded as higher ups in TST become independent. We're going to see more and more TST chapters either split apart, fold, or become independent. A lot of things are changing on sort of like the landscape of Satanism because of that. So there's a lot that's happening, which is both quite worrying for a lot of people, but also quite exciting from how things will end up lying afterwards. I personally believe there's no such thing as too much Satanism, and I think by having a lot of people do things in quote unquote their own way helps further the conversation more generally and helps people develop their own personal ideas in a way that I think would be better for everyone going forwards.
So just a final few questions. First off, what would you like people to learn from Satanism? Is there something in particular that you think the world at large can learn from Satanism generally and your organization in particular? Yeah, feel free to take as much time as you need. That this entire gap will just disappear.
That's all right. Yeah, this I did get this question earlier, and I was reading it and going like, yeah, that's a great question. I should have an answer for that.
I didn't write it, so I can't take credit for it. So
that's a really good question. I think that a lot of people should learn from Satanists the idea that your leadership and the people who present themselves to you are not above you. They're not completely unquestionable, but you should be able to question. You should be able to question your leaders. You should be able to find new ways of doing things. You should be able to build yourself better and forwards from where you stand. You should always be questioning how you both practice your personal life, practice your religious practice how you do everything. Always be questioning that sort of thing. Like if people are telling you something, find out why they're telling you that.
And on the reverse side, is there something that you think that Satanism in this sort of transitional phase, is there something that you think that it can learn either from other religious organizations or from culture in general? Is there something you wish that Satanism in general ought to adopt more so of?
Did have an answer for this. I guess, like specifically in the form of Christianity, I think there's a lot of like quote unquote best practice in how you do things, how Christianity as a religion exists and how it exhibits itself. I think that having a regular place of worship to go to is quite affirming. By having that sort of space, even if we don't necessarily want to be preaching, we don't want to be preaching to a wider people. We want people to come to us and believe in things from that sort of space. But I think that having a place of worship that people can have and people can have access to is a really quite lovely and affirming thing. Although I don't believe anymore, I believe that as an idea holds weight and holds merit and it should be thought of more often.
Do you have anything that you would like to pose then to Satanists? Sorry, excuse me, let me start over. Do you have anything you'd like to pose to Christians from a Satanist perspective? Is there like one question that if you were to, talking to a Christian audience, that you would pose to them as a Satanist and say, this is what I'd want you to consider?
Why? Why is a very broad question, and I feel like I'm cheating, so I'm going to go into a little bit more depth. I'm aware that as quote unquote the figurehead of a umbrella organization for Satanism, that the following question I'm going to ask will sound ridiculous. But what is, or why do people who are Christian feel like they need to be a part of larger established organizations, people who are Catholic, people who are Methodist, people who are Pentecostal, Episcopalian, people who are Anglican, especially if they think that the actions of the church body that they're a part of are beyond the pale, the sort of thing that people do not accept, the sort of thing that people do not believe in or agree with or think are wholeheartedly wrong. Like, I have met a lot of people who are Catholic who are very much like, oh yes, well, obviously all of the scandals over the last 20 years that have come through, that I do not have to detail, are terrible. But we're still Catholic because we believe that those people were influencing correctly. And I'm like, yes, but these were people who were priests, they were people who were high-ranking members of your faith, who were actively being protected by repeated different, let's call it governments. That's not the case, but the Holy See is a state. And being protected deliberately by that. Why do you still think that? What stops you from doing your own independent Christian faith? What stops you becoming your own Christian? Now, I'm aware the answer to that for a lot of people will be that Christianity is basically directly focused on, for a lot of people, following someone who's appointed as God's messenger on earth. I get that. However, what stops you from having that personal conversation with God and changing?
Well, we really appreciate your time, Eddie. One last thing. Where can people find more from either you or from the Global Order of Satan, in case they're curious?
If you want to find out more from the Global Order of Satan, I recommend running to our website, which is globalorderofsatan.com or gosatan.com, because we're funny. And you can find more about us, various advocacies, philosophy, bits and pieces of them for media, and ways of getting in contact as well. I'd also recommend going to quiztanic.com for more information about the wider Satanic movement, and also for a lot of really detailed investigation and investigatory work around the Satanic Temple and how it currently stands.
Thanks again for listening to the Spiritually Incorrect podcast. If you like what you heard, don't forget to like and subscribe below, or to check us out on Spotify. And if you want to hear more from this week's episode or guest, our Patreon account has exclusive unaired content, often featuring up to an hour of additional footage and interviews for each episode. We save some of the most controversial and pulse-pounding topics just for our Patreon members. Members get access to that, plus a chance to meet monthly with Jonathan and I, suggest episode topics, join us live for an episode to ask the special guests questions, or even get a personalized episode custom-made just for you. Check out our Patreon link in the description below. And don't forget to check out our official website at spirituallyincorrectpodcast.com to see what else you're missing out on. Sound effects from Zapsplat.com. Special thanks to Jordan Birch, whose song Starry Night provides the intro and outro for this podcast. You can hear more of his music on YouTube or Spotify.